I should just start with a disclaimer that I actually represent two institutions. I work half-time at Stanford and half-time at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, and everything I'm about to say is just me, okay? So it's, and I just thought I'd love that we had this great setup by Jim, because not only am I going to talk about low-hanging fruit a lot, literally, I also use that McKinsey curve quite a bit. So this is good. We're having like a progression in cumulative knowledge here. So, okay. So let's see. There's 4 parts to the talk that I'm going to do right now. I'm going to start off with some introductory remarks about the economy, energy, and carbon. Then I'm going to use that McKinsey curve and just sort of look at the relative cost of options for greenhouse gas reductions with related policy issues. And then some examples that people use to show how the low-hanging fruit, picking the low-hanging fruit, can add up. And then I'm going to try to close with a caution to remember the high-hanging fruit. This next slide starts from the BP Energy Outlook in 2015, I believe. So it's got a graph of GDP, that's the orange line. It's got energy demand, that's the purple line, and it's got carbon dioxide emissions, that's the next line down. So if you think about that energy demand against the GDP, that's sort of, you can think of that as energy in our economic system. Okay, and then the difference between these two lines helps you to get that little bit more of carbon coming out of our energy system. So what this graph basically reflects is that it has historically tended to be cheaper and even what we call productivity enhancing to use less energy than it is to decarbonize energy. The first best policy instruments that price carbon because of the externality, the emissions externality of carbon dioxide, should help the energy system find and pick the cheapest low-hanging fruit. And this is the cap and trade and the carbon tax that Jim was just talking about. Then a lot of us call these things complementary policy instruments. We'll target either energy in our economic system, such as energy efficiency standards, or carbon in our energy system, and that would be things like renewable portfolio standards. Okay, so just keeping that in mind, now we're going to go into the sort of the relative cost of some of those options for greenhouse gas reductions with related policy issues. So there's another version of that McKinsey curve. This was in The Economist in 2007, and it's same, all the caveats that Jim said. It's just a handy way to sort of think about sorting these things against cost and with reduction, with emissions reduction. Now I don't have to go into what the axes are. This is great. But that's their baseline of what would be the negative abatement versus the, for the things that are cheap to do versus expensive to do. So this first set is these high cost, high benefit, not necessarily commercially available options that you hear a lot about, and we know a lot about them as environmental journalists and policy practitioners, et cetera. So wind power and photovoltaics and geothermal power and tidal power and concentrated solar power and carbon capture and sequestration. So these are some of the key examples of these expensive, not necessarily commercially available. Some of them are coming way down in the cost curve. We can spend a good bit of time talking about a lot of these. I'm assuming Nate and maybe Catherine talked about that too. I'm sorry I didn't get here for the beginning of the session. But now, and then let's go through some of the moderate cost, moderate abatement ones. In particular, we have nuclear power, and there's been a lot of controversy about nuclear lately. So, the trade-offs here are, of course, nuclear power versus safety, and things like ethanol, and you have issues with the trade-offs with things like indirect land use change and what the trade-offs are for the food system. So putting that in context, now we're going to spend more time focusing on those options that are considered the cost winners, the demand reduction ones, the energy efficiency things, the low-hanging fruit. You'll see my little fruit picture through a lot of these slides. So, okay. Here's some of the main ones. Insulation, that's a compact fluorescent light bulb. Is going the way of the dinosaur now with the LEDs, but I don't have a good picture for those. We've got solar water heating and fuel-efficient vehicles. These are the sorts of technologies that we're talking about. So, going back to Jim's first slide, a lot of people say, like, well, if these things are so cost-effective and why aren't we just doing them already? It's in people's best interest, right? So we have this term called the energy efficiency gap, which is sort of described as consumers and businesses use more energy than is optimal in their own self-interest. Or negative abatement technologies are not universally adopted, let alone used, okay? So a lot of explanations are advanced. There's evidence shown in certain cases and not other cases for a lot of these. I'm just going to rattle through a lot of them. They're not all in neoclassical economic sense, but so a lot of these are behavioral. So they'd asked me to try to get the behavioral component in. So for example, imperfect information is one of the major ones. So potential adopters may be unaware of the energy attributes of goods and services. This particular one is one of the reasons why, since '74, I think it is, we've had energy guide labels on lots of things. So just having disclosure about the information about what the energy use is of the product or service. Split incentives. This is potential adopters of a technology may not be able to appropriate the benefits of energy efficiency investments directly. So in this case, think about a landlord and a tenant. That's the easiest way to think about this one. So it's the landlord may be putting in all the appliances in the apartments, right? But the tenant is the one paying the electricity bill. So, there's a distinction if you think that there is a higher cost to the energy efficient product. So the CapEx versus the OpEx is sort of a thing to think about here. Bounded rationality. Potential adopters may have constraints such as time and attention, competing priorities, et cetera, that limit their ability to optimize economic self-interest when making energy efficiency investments. Instead, they satisfice. This is pretty well established, especially in a world of low energy prices. I'm a really busy person. I'm not, what do I care, And it's interesting because this goes back to all this great work by Herd Simon and all of bounded rationality is one of my favorites. Okay, then there's hidden costs. Potential adopters may be aware or perceive of additional costs to energy efficiency investments, such as disruptions to business as usual, increased search costs, et cetera, that analysts don't understand. Risk. Potential adopters may find or perceive energy efficiency investments to be risky. Potential adopters may find or expect energy efficiency investments to require high upfront costs for which they may have insufficient internal funds and or difficulty raising external funds. And then I'm throwing in my other one, which is the one I've been focusing on more. The rest fell out lovely from a really good book by this guy, Steve Sorrell, an economist in the UK. But this last one's mine. The producers and the intermediaries may, that bring energy-using goods and services to market may actually themselves defer optimal energy efficiency take-up. But that's for another talk. Okay, here's your underlying, so with all of that, you can see there's a lot of different things you can go at with this, but there is an underlying unifying concept to U.S. energy efficiency policy on certain things, like products in your household or, to a lesser extent, buildings, okay? So this curve is sort of an odd curve, but the basic idea on this one is that going that direction, so think about this as a refrigerator, for example, or a clothes washer. So there's a lot of refrigerators or clothes washers you could purchase, right? Some of them will have low energy efficiency. So this is where the word efficiency itself throws you off because it's not energy use going one direction. So think about it more about, so things that are high efficiency are on that end and things that are low efficiency are on this end. And there's this underlying thought in the policy world that there's a distribution of these products, that most products fall in the middle, and that these building codes and standards here are designed to cut off the part of the distribution that would sort of be your low-hanging fruit in a different way of thinking about these fruit. And I probably shouldn't have put the fruit here, but anyway. Okay, so this is like, maybe it's cheap and it's not that efficient, but, so we really shouldn't be selling these or having anybody buy these in any sense. I've got a lot of graphs that can show you the amount of household income that the average American and the impoverished Americans spend on all sorts of different appliances, and they're very close to the same. So there's a real issue here about like whether the cheapest appliances. And the idea is that this particular unit is supposed to be the number of units sold. So this is the sales, okay? So the idea of these things, the building codes and standards, are supposed to cut off the low end of the distribution And see over there where it says Energy Star, that's supposed to highlight like best practices, you know, like the top 25% in terms of what is on the market. And then you have that little one over there for R&D, and that's to try to really push the frontier. So that's the general concept of appliance standards or a lot of other things, and that's been expanded a lot, appliance standards in the last, especially under the Obama administration. And the little orange thing, oh, it really didn't come out well. That's supposed to be the high-hanging fruit, okay, which hopefully we'll get back to. Okay, so besides that unifying concept, though, there's an awful lot of scatter. There's a lot of additional policies and programs designed to help with picking up the $20 bill from the sidewalk. So things like utility programs and banning incandescents and tax credits and solar water heating subsidies and energy use labels and information nudges. And we could go into this in some detail, but if you guys have ever heard of O-Power, or getting utility bills that say you compared to your energy efficient neighbor. And there's a lot of really interesting research out there. If you put that difference between you and your neighbor in terms of a happy face or dollars saved or pounds of pollutants that contribute to things like cancer and childhood asthma, very interesting, the differences you get in these sorts of effects and these nudges. So, okay. See, I'm just going to race through some of these graphs. They come from Jim Sweeney, who's the executive director of our center at Stanford. Energy efficiency adds up, factors reducing U.S. carbon dioxide intensity. This is over time. Back in 1973, this is the carbon intensity of the U.S. economy. This is the trajectory we were on before 1973. And this is the difference of the enhanced energy efficiency. And this is what we get for decarbonization of energy consumption. This is energy efficiency adds up, reductions in U.S. energy intensity broken down by time periods. So before the energy crisis, low prices, no policy, about 0.5% per year decline in energy intensity. During the energy crisis, in that decade, high prices, a lot of policy, a lot of things getting tried, 2.7% per year decline in energy intensity. Oops, I hit the wrong direction. Post-energy crisis, things modulate, the prices go down. You get a 1.7% year decline, and that's still what we're getting, actually, about a 1.7% year decline. And you can see the difference over time. Then this is a nice little kind of graph that he does with consumption trends changing. That black line is the energy crisis. So this is, you can see before that black line what the trajectories are, and he likes to extend this out just so you can kind of visualize the difference for industrial energy, transportation energy, residential industry, and commercial energy. I would like to just say, since we're in California, there's some interesting things here about thinking about how the emitting activities in California differ from the US, and it's not all because of policy or all because of energy efficiency, but they did play a role. So, so anyway, here's something interesting. For the US, electric power is like 40% back in 2002, before we did all sorts of carbon stuff, and we were only at 20% in California. Transportation was a much more significant source. That's industrial, et cetera, et cetera. Like, there's a lot of reasons there, but you should know that California has been a leader in energy efficiency policy, as well as it's much more well known, I think, for its role in transportation policy. But there's a lot of resource things, but they made specific decisions not to continue using oil, for example. So, so if you want some more information about some of these things, here's a plug. My boss, Jim Sweeney, has a book out right now on energy efficiency. I co-chair through Stanford something called the Behavior, Energy, and Climate Change Conference, which is about 700 people from academics to industry to you name it, talking about interesting kinds of insights into human decisions and the use of energy, and very widely. And also actually getting into adaptation as well, some of the more climate relevant things. And then this is just a little bit about our center. Besides the sectors that we work in, we look at human behavior and institutional analysis, a lot of these things there. Do I have any time to talk about the high-hanging fruit? Okay, I'm going to take it anyways. All right, so this is the currently expensive or not commercially available options. Think sulfur dioxide scrubbers for power plants in 1970, or think electric cars in 1990, or think, I don't know what you want to think today, but fill in the blank. The policy options that not only push the technology, which in my economics of innovation world are usually the R&D things, but that actually pulled the technology into the marketplace, make a difference. And some of these important pulls are things like the 1979 New Source Performance Standards for SO2 control, or the 1990 California Zero Emission Vehicle Program, which was a small part of the larger low emission vehicle program. Anyway, we could talk more about that, but I just want to show something kind of interesting about cap and trade for the SO2 program. So this is government in 1990 dreaming of a cap and trade program. And that next line there is 1995 when the trading begins. There's a 5-year period in between. And these are the expected prices back before the trading began. Those bars, the little red, this is coming from a lot of archival sources. So, you know, people then thinking that those are going to be the prices, pick their low-hanging fruit. And you can see that the allowance prices generally stay far below the red boxes, and that you only really see the swings in the actual prices right at the end of the period. There's a lot of legal things involved. This is some of my research. I think there's a resource in the packet about this. Same thing with a NOx, OTC NOx budget program. Sort of, I mean, it's a more complicated story because of different times where different states got added into the program, but it's sort of the same bar language here. You can, the low-hanging fruit, you can see generally speaking, our prices stay below the bars of expected prices a lot. And that's really great for low-hanging fruit and doing exactly what you want a cap and trade program to do, right? Which is to get emissions reductions that hit a target in terms of emissions, but also do it at, you know, low price and incentivize people to get their low-hanging fruit. These are a lot of the things that they did. But if you think about the high-hanging fruit with things like unlimited banking and stuff, when people weren't expecting those prices to be so low. So if you're an innovator who wants to sell into this market, who thinks that there's going to be a market for some new technology that's going to work out, so this is something interesting. So like during the period of traditional environmental regulation before you switched it, and then you have that 5-year period where you're getting ready in the SO2 market for trading, this is what's happening with patenting activity. So this is the people who are creating new technologies to sell to try to reduce emissions. So, but you get to trading, and this is for the highest cost, high emissions reduction technology. So it'd be like on that far end of a McKinsey curve of sulfur dioxide, for example. But this is like the low end of the McKinsey curve for sulfur dioxide, and this is like that same green is during the traditional period. This is during the preparation period, and that's patenting activity after you have a successful cap and trade program. And you can do this for the NOx control, for the high expensive for NOx, and you can do this for the low. And you see in all the cases that the patenting activity kind of really goes down. So for high-hanging fruit, having some sort of mechanism where you know that you can adjust the caps at a certain point in time, or know that it's not going to just, where the price is in the toilet. That's one of the reasons why that $12.50 carbon price floor is such a useful thing to have, so that the people don't see that the bottom's going to fall out of a market that they might be innovating to sell into. So, okay. By the way, I have lots of slides on things like the energy R&D stuff, if you want to see that, or appliance saturation. I heard some of the questions from before. So anyway, so got lots of backup slides if anyone wants to talk about any of this. So.